metaphor, which is kind of where all of NLP fits all together. This is kind of bringing together all the pieces. So we're going to do that over the next 3 months. So we're going to start with some mind maps that I put together today to give you these steps. Because what we're trying to do now is break everything down step by step by step, so you know how to do it. Does that sound good? Fantastic. So we're going to start with the basic structure of metaphors and create and utilise them is, first of all, you gather information. The most common question that people ask when they start doing NLP is, so what do you want? Which is like the first question that you normally ask people when you're working with them. But obviously there are a lot more questions that you can ask. The more you can gather the information to know what the structure is of their model or their worldview, as Seth Godin calls it, the easier it will be to create a metaphor that will reflect that worldview and will take people to where they want to be. So the first step is to gather information. We'll go a lot deeper into that. The second step is to create the metaphor, and we'll go deeper into that. And the third step is to utilise the metaphor or tell your story. So there's 3 steps: gather information, create the metaphor. That's very interesting moment not to know about. So the first step is gather information. What we're going to do is go through this as an overview, then we're going to go deeper into it, and we're going to do some exercises as we go through. So when you're gathering information, the kinds of information that might be useful are the things that are in logical levels. So you can identify the significant relationships that the person is in, the significant people who are in the story, what the values are of the person, what their beliefs are, what skills and capabilities they have, and more importantly what they don't have, what behaviour they're doing at the moment, where they're doing it, what environment, and the way that they're using language to identify where they are when they start. So there'll be loads of clues in the language and in their non-verbal communication. The more that you learn to build a map in you of the information that they're telling you, the easier it will be for you to replicate their model in you. If you don't do that, you're very often working off your model, which is not really going to be, unless your model is way bigger than theirs, it's not going to be as useful as working from their model. So what you're basically doing here is building a full and rich representation of their model. Also, you might be curious to know what anchors they have to anchor them in place in that model of the world. So, breaking it down to a bit more detail. First of all, you're going to identify the events in their problem state or their present state. If you're doing remedial work, that'll be a problem. If you're doing generative change work, it'll just be where they are now. Next step is to elicit their strategy for making the problem. I heard Dan Bradbury say this, the 5 biggest problems that people make in their businesses. And I thought, doesn't it mean have? And I thought, no, it actually means make. You kind of have to keep reconstructing the problem in your head in order to keep having it. So you can be really curious about how do they make the problem, and then identify what their desired goal is, direction and state. So if their desired state is they want to be ecstatically happy, and at the moment they're not really sure, then that would be that information that we take from those 2 places. But you want a lot more detail than that. That's just a big picture where you're taking them. You want all this detail as well. As the more information that you have up to a point where you have enough, the easier it will be to tell them the story that will exactly match where they are now and where you're taking to them to. This is what makes NLP change work so elegant and easy. Because you don't have to fight with them. You can just go with what their model is. The next step then is to test the well-formedness. So I have all this information. Here, is it well-formed, or in other words, does it make sense to you? Can you understand what their model is like based on that information? And then the next step is to identify what stops them from resolving the problem. So with all this information, or if it's generative change, what prevents them from moving from their present state to where they want to be? Which is a lot of time when people come to learn new things, they put barriers in place based on what they already know, rather than the stuff that they want to learn. So they have an I can't learn this in some way or another. By doing this, you can make sure that everything is structured to make it really easy when you get to the next step. So that kind of makes sense for Carl. So the next big step 2 is to create the metaphor. So some of you may recall that exercise that you did on your practitioner training. If you were a flower, what flower would you be? If you were a car, what kind of car would you be? If you were a type of floor covering, what type of floor covering would you be? These are ways to elicit the context in which you're going to tell the metaphor. Sometimes people will tell you the times you might need to be generating a metaphor for them. So if you say to them, if your present say, what's it like? If they go, it's like being wrapped up in barbed wire. That gives you a context for the metaphor, because probably when you look, you probably won't really have barbed wire around them. In other words, it's mental barbed wire, it's not physical barbed wire. Or, feels like having a dark tunnel. Something like that. So you can literally utilise the metaphor that they give you, or you can create one for them. The next bit then is to populate and plot, so it's isomorphic. Isomorphic means it has the same structure. We're going to go much deeper into that over these next 3 months. And then the next step is to determine a resolution. And to determine a resolution, you're going to use all the NLP skills of design goal, strategy to get them to where they want to get to, rep systems, some modality shifts, tier categories, and reframing. Blank. Can't remember what's the tier categories. Okay, we'll go into that in more depth. So we're going to we're going to go through all this. I'm just giving you an overview at the moment, so you can sort of see where we're going. So having done this, you'll then have created your metaphor. There's a process that goes behind that, and I'll explain to you. And the final bit is tell your story. We utilise metaphors, it's called the NLP. When you're utilising the metaphor, you're going to be using language patterns that are useful for telling stories. So lack of referential index, which is where you don't refer it specifically to that person. It's like he or she is non-specific or lacking reference, people or they. Unspecified verb is where you don't specify the way the verb is structured. Normalizations is things that you can't fit in a wheelbarrow. Explain that in a bit more depth below. Then commands are when you start to shift into command mode. So you start to instruct them on how to move forward easily. Quotes are particularly useful to use in stories, as are selection restriction violations. As typically, especially if you're using fairy tales, you may well have things in there that wouldn't normally speak. Like, who's ever seen a speaking mouse? I haven't. I haven't seen one in Little Hampton. And then you're also going to be using anchors. You have a choice as to whether you make the metaphor overt or covert. If you're using overt metaphor, the person will know that you're telling them a metaphor. If you're using covert metaphors, you're not using anecdotes or things where you'll be stalling stuff, but they won't necessarily know that you're stalling stuff. And then the other big choice is whether you want to use fairy tales or anecdotes. Anecdotes are kind of stories about someone similar to the person that you're working with. So you might go, I knew a manager once, or my friend John was a famous one that Milton used to use. And my friend John was always a story that related directly to the person's problem. It's just basically creating a bit of distance between the person as they are here, and you're gathering information, and the person as they are here when you told the story and they've resolved their problem. Then you might also choose to use hypnosis.